I told you to stay away from my horses. Get off this property right now!
I wasn't doing anything. You need to calm down.
I moved to this ranch because I wanted peace. I wanted a place where I could breathe, a place where the noise of the city didn't follow me, a place where the only sounds were wind, birds, and the soft creak of trees. That was the dream, and for a while it felt real. The ranch was beautiful. Wide open fields, a long driveway, a simple house, and a fence that wasn't fancy but felt strong. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I loved it. I didn't move there to start trouble. I didn't move there to make enemies. I moved there because I wanted to live. But I didn't realize that living in a community like that meant you weren't just buying land. You were buying rules. And those rules came with people who liked to enforce them. The first few weeks were peaceful. Neighbors waved when they passed. People kept their yards clean. It felt like a place where everyone respected each other. Then I got the first letter. It was in a plain envelope with a printed HOA logo, the kind of logo that makes you feel like you're dealing with something official, something serious. The letter said I had violated a rule. It didn't say which rule. It didn't say how. It just said I had to fix it immediately, or I'd face a fine. I read it twice. Then I read it again. I couldn't understand it. There was nothing wrong with my property. My fence was the right height. My lawn was the right length. My house looked the way it was supposed to, so I called the HOA office. A woman answered. She spoke like she was reading from a script. She didn't sound angry, but she didn't sound friendly either. She told me to stop doing whatever I was doing and to fix it immediately. I asked her what the violation was. She paused for a second. Then she said, "It's in the letter. You'll see." That was the first time I felt something in my stomach twist. Not fear exactly. More like suspicion, because she wasn't telling me anything. She was hiding behind rules and paperwork. I asked again, and she said, "You'll have to wait. Someone will come by and talk to you." I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen and looked out the window. My property looked fine. My life looked fine. But something didn't feel fine. A week passed. No one came by. No one talked to me. But the letters kept coming. One was about my driveway. One was about the color of my garage door. One was about my mailbox. One was about a tree that I hadn't even planted. Every letter sounded like someone was searching for a reason to complain. Every letter sounded like someone wanted to control me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was just the HOA doing its job. Maybe they were just strict. Maybe they were just trying to keep the neighborhood clean. But the more letters I got, the more it felt personal. It felt like someone was targeting me. I started to look at my neighbors differently, not because they were suspicious, but because I wondered who was behind this. I asked around casually. I asked people if they had received similar letters. Most people said no. Some people said they had, but not like this. One neighbor told me, "Don't worry about it. They do that to everyone." But I knew that wasn't true. When a rule is enforced on everyone, it feels fair. When a rule is enforced on one person, it feels like a threat. That's when I met her. Her name was Karen. Not the internet Karen, not the meme Karen. The real kind. The kind who smiled while making you feel small. I saw her walking her dog one afternoon. She was dressed nicely, like she was going to a meeting. Her dog was on a leash. Her posture was straight. Her expression was sharp. She stopped near my driveway and looked at my property like she was inspecting it. I didn't know her, but she looked at me like she knew me. She walked up to my gate and stopped. She waited like she expected me to come out. I did. I stepped outside. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to start trouble. "Hi," I said. She nodded. "I'm new here," I said. She didn't respond. She looked at my fence. Then she looked at my house. Then she looked back at me. Finally, she spoke. "You're the one they keep sending letters to," she said. Her voice was calm, but had a sharp edge. I didn't like that she said they, like she wasn't part of it. "Who are you?" I asked. She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just someone who cares about this community," she said. Then she added, and someone who makes sure the rules are followed. I tried to stay calm. Who are you exactly? I asked again. She paused, like she was deciding how much to reveal. Then she said, I'm on the HOA board. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a neighbor. I was dealing with someone who had power. And she wasn't just using power. She was enjoying it. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to give her a reaction. She looked pleased, like she knew she had made me nervous. Then she said something that changed everything. You have 30 days, she said. 30 days to fix everything or you'll be evicted. I felt the air leave my lungs. Evicted. From my own home. The word didn't feel real. It sounded like something you hear on TV. Something you see in movies. But she said it like it was normal. Like it was her right. I tried to speak, but my voice sounded small. Evicted from what? I asked. My own property? She nodded slowly. You're breaking rules, she said. Rules that you agreed to when you moved here. I looked at her. I looked at her face. I looked at her dog. I looked at her clothes. Everything about her screamed confidence, like she was certain she was right. And that certainty scared me more than anything else, because I knew how these things worked. Once someone like her decides you're a problem, the system starts to move. It starts with letters. Then it starts with meetings. Then it starts with legal actions. And once it gets to that point, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. It only matters who has power. I swallowed hard. I want to see the rule, I said. I want to see what I'm violating. She looked at me like I was being difficult. Everything is in the letter, she said. Just read it. Fix it. I didn't like the way she said fix it, like I was a child. I knew then that this was more than a simple HOA issue. This was a personal attack. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting me, and I didn't know why. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. I didn't want to show fear. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction, but I could feel in my body the fear, the anger, the confusion. I asked her one more question. Why me? I said, why are you doing this? She looked at me like I was asking something stupid. Because you don't belong here, she said. Because you don't follow the rules. Because you don't respect the community. Her words hit me like a punch. I didn't belong here. I had just bought this place. I had worked hard to get here. I had done everything right. But she was saying I didn't belong. She was saying I was an outsider. And the worst part was, she sounded convinced. She sounded like she believed it, like she had already decided my fate. That day, I walked back inside and sat at my kitchen table. I stared at the letters again. I stared at the envelopes. I stared at the HOA logo. And I realized something. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. And I wasn't going to let her control me, not without a fight. After Karen threatened me with eviction, I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about her words. 30 days. Eviction. You don't belong here. It felt like a punch, not just to my pride, but to my entire life. Because this ranch wasn't just property. It was my freedom. It was my hard work. It was my dream. And now, someone was telling me I didn't deserve it. The next morning, I went outside early. I walked the property. I looked at the fence. I looked at the driveway. I looked at the yard. Everything looked normal. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed illegal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I walked to the mailbox. There was another letter. This one was worse. It was written in a more official tone. It had a legal stamp. It looked like it came from a lawyer. It said I was violating HOA rules. It said I had to attend a meeting. It said if I didn't attend, the HOA would move forward with an eviction process. I felt my stomach drop. I read the letter again. And again, it didn't say what rule I violated. It didn't say what I did wrong. It didn't say how I could fix it. It only said, "You are violating HOA rules." That was it. The letter was designed to scare me, to confuse me, to make me feel like I had no choice. I decided then that I wasn't going to be scared. I wasn't going to let them bully me with paperwork. So I started making calls. First, I called the HOA office again. This time I asked to speak with someone else. someone higher. The receptionist put me on hold. I could hear the music playing. A slow, calm song. It felt like the opposite of what I was feeling. Finally, a man answered. He sounded tired. He sounded like he didn't want to deal with me. He told me to read the letter. He told me the rules were in the letter. He told me to attend the meeting. I asked him again, "What rule am I violating?" He paused. Then he said, "It's a property violation." "What property violation?" I asked. He said, "You will be informed at the meeting." I could feel my patience slipping. "That's not an answer," I said. "I need to know now. I need to know what I'm being accused of." He sighed, like he was annoyed. "You will know at the meeting," he repeated. I hung up. I felt my anger rising. This wasn't normal. This wasn't fair. The next day, I drove to the HOA office. I wanted to speak to someone face to face. I wanted to see if they would act differently when I was standing in front of them. The office was small. It had a receptionist desk, a few chairs, and a wall covered in framed documents. It looked like a place that cared about rules. I walked up to the desk. The receptionist looked at me like she was expecting me, like she already knew who I was. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here about the letters." I said, "I want to know what I'm being accused of." She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me. Then she said, "You have a meeting." "I know," I said. "I want to know what the issue is before the meeting." She shook her head. "You'll be informed at the meeting," she said. I felt my frustration building again. "This is ridiculous." I said, "I'm being threatened with eviction, and you won't tell me why." The receptionist's expression changed. It became cold. She leaned in slightly. "Listen," she said quietly. "You don't want to cause trouble." Her words hit me like a slap. I stared at her. "Trouble?" I asked. She nodded. "People who cause trouble don't last here," she said. That's when I realized something. This wasn't just about rules. This was about control. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were enforcing compliance. And they wanted me to comply. Or else. I left the office feeling angry, but also more alert. I realized I needed to be careful. If I fought them the wrong way, I could lose. If I fought them the right way, I could expose them. But I didn't know how yet. The next week, I started talking to neighbors again. But this time, I didn't talk casually. I asked direct questions. I asked if anyone else had received letters. I asked if anyone else had been threatened with eviction. I asked if anyone knew Karen. Most people looked at me like they didn't want to be involved. One neighbor, a woman named Lisa, finally spoke. She told me she had seen Karen at meetings. She said Karen was always the one pushing for stricter rules. She said Karen was always the one speaking loudly. She said Karen was always the one accusing people of violations. Lisa also told me something that made my skin crawl. She said, "Karen has a history." "What kind of history?" I asked. Lisa hesitated. Then she said, "She used to be involved in another HOA. People said she forced families out. She didn't like people who didn't fit her idea of the community." I felt my heart sink. This wasn't the first time Karen had done this. And it wasn't just about rules. It was about her power. She enjoyed it. She wanted to feel in control. I started to understand why she targeted me. I wasn't like the others. I was new. I was independent. I didn't know the way things are done. I wasn't afraid of her. And that scared her. The day before the meeting, I got another letter. This one was even more aggressive. It said if I didn't attend the meeting, the HOA would proceed with eviction. It said I would be responsible for all legal fees. It said I would be forced to leave. I read it and felt a cold anger. I realized they were trying to scare me into silence. But I wasn't going to be silent. I decided to prepare. I printed all my documents. I printed my property records. I printed my mortgage papers. I printed the HOA rules that were supposed to apply to everyone. I also started recording everything. I recorded phone calls. I recorded meetings. I recorded conversations. I knew it might be risky, but I also knew it might be the only way to protect myself. The night before the meeting, I went to sleep late. I kept thinking about Karen. I kept thinking about her smile, her confident posture, her sharp voice. I kept thinking about how she said, "You don't belong here." I knew then that this wasn't just about my property. This was about my dignity. And I wasn't going to let her take that from me. The next day, I drove to the meeting with my documents in hand. My heart was racing. I felt like I was walking into a courtroom, and I knew I was. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to leave without fighting, because I had something they didn't expect. I had a truth, and I was going to use it. The day of the HOA meeting, I woke up early. My mind was loud. My heart was pounding. I felt like I was about to step into a courtroom, because that's what it felt like. I dressed carefully. Not fancy, not too casual. Just enough to show I wasn't a threat, but also not weak. I drove to the community center where the meeting was being held. The building looked normal. Plain, clean, nothing dramatic. But inside it was different. Inside it was tense. When I walked in, I saw people already seated. Some were chatting quietly. Some were looking at their phones. Some were staring at me. I didn't know most of them, but I could feel their eyes on me. I saw Karen right away. She was sitting at the front table, the one reserved for the board. She looked calm. She looked like she belonged there. She wasn't smiling, but she looked confident. She looked at me like she was already winning. I took a seat near the back. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to give her more power. The meeting began. The HOA president started with routine announcements, trash schedules, road repairs, new community events. Then he moved to the main topic, my case. He said my name clearly, like it was a sentence. I stood up. I felt every eye in the room on me. The president said, "We have received multiple complaints about your property." I nodded slowly. "I am here to address them," I said. Karen leaned forward. She spoke with authority. "Your property is not in compliance," she said. "Your fence is too tall. Your driveway is not up to code. Your mailbox is not approved. Your landscaping is not within HOA standards." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear everything. Then I asked the question I had been asking for weeks. "Can you show me the evidence?" I asked, "Can you show me the rule I broke?" Karen looked at me like I was being difficult. "The rules are in the HOA book," she said. "They are public." I nodded. "Then show me the rule," I said. "Show me where I broke it." Karen's face tightened. She said, "We don't need to show you. You know the rules." I felt a wave of anger. It wasn't just anger. It was shock. How could she say that? How could she treat me like a criminal without proof? I looked around the room. Some people were watching quietly. Some were looking away. Some were nodding. It felt like a trial. And I was a defendant. The president spoke again. "We have a motion to move forward with eviction proceedings," he said, "unless the resident comes into compliance." Karen looked satisfied, like the plan was working. I took a deep breath. Then I spoke. "I am not in violation," I said. "My property is in compliance. I have documents to prove it." Karen scoffed. The room laughed quietly. I didn't let it affect me. I continued. "I have my property records, my mortgage papers, my construction documents. Everything is legal and approved." I held up a folder. I felt the weight of it in my hands. I could see Karen's eyes narrow. She didn't like that I had proof. The president said, "This is not the time for that. You will have to provide evidence later." I felt my patience snap. "Later?" I said. "You're threatening me with eviction, and you want to bring evidence later?" The room got quiet. Karen stared at me. She looked angry. She looked offended. And I realized something. She didn't want evidence. She didn't want truth. She wanted control. I looked at the president and said, "I will not accept this. I will not be bullied. If you want to evict me, you must prove I broke the rules." Karen spoke again, louder this time. "You are causing trouble," she said. "You are disrupting the community." I felt my face heat up. I was trying to stand up for myself. And she was calling me the problem. That was when I realized something else. She wasn't just trying to evict me. She was trying to ruin my reputation. She was trying to make everyone think I was a bad neighbor. Because if people believed that, no one would support me. and that would make it easier for her to win. I took a deep breath. I looked at Karen. I looked at her face. I looked at her eyes. And I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of being exposed. Because I could tell she was hiding something. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew there was a secret. And I knew it was connected to me. The meeting continued. Karen kept listing complaints. She kept speaking like she was a judge, like she had the right to decide my fate. Then the president asked if anyone else had comments. No one spoke. No one wanted to get involved. Then I heard a voice. It was a man near the front. He said, "I've lived here for years. I've never seen this kind of enforcement. It feels personal." Karen turned her head sharply. Her eyes locked onto him. "Who are you?" she asked. The man said, "I'm a resident." Karen's voice changed. She sounded colder. "That's not relevant," she said. The man shrugged. "I just think it's unfair," he said. I felt a small surge of relief. Someone else saw it too, but Karen didn't like it. She stood up. Her voice became sharp. "This meeting is not for opinions," she said. "It's for enforcement." Then she turned to me. "You will be evicted if you do not comply," she said. I felt something inside me break. I felt the anger rise again. I realized she wasn't just threatening me. She was trying to break me. She was trying to scare me into leaving. But I wasn't going to leave. Not now. Not after all of this. I spoke again, calm but firm. "Then you need to prove it," I said. "You need to show me the evidence. You need to show me the rule. You need to show me the complaint." Karen stared at me. Her face changed. Her eyes narrowed. She looked like she was trying to decide if she should attack me or ignore me. Then she said something that sounded like a warning. "Don't push this," she said, "or you will regret it." I felt a chill, not because I was afraid, but because I knew she was serious. She wasn't just a strict HOA board member. She was dangerous. And I knew then that this wasn't just a fight about rules. This was a fight about power. The meeting ended with the president saying the decision would be made in a week. I left the room feeling shaken. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew one thing. Karen was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. Because I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for the truth, and I was going to win. After the meeting, I didn't go home right away. I stayed outside for a while, sitting in my car. My hands were shaking. My heart was still racing. I felt like I had just walked out of a courtroom. I kept thinking about Karen's words. "Don't push this or you will regret it." I knew she meant it. She wasn't just warning me. She was threatening me. I drove home slowly. I didn't want to go inside and feel alone. I didn't want to be in a place where I could be attacked without witnesses. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table. I opened my folder of documents again. I stared at them like they were a shield. I tried to calm myself down. I tried to think clearly. I realized I needed more than documents. I needed evidence of what was really going on, and I needed to find out why Karen was targeting me. I started to think about the meeting again. What did Karen want? Why did she keep saying I was breaking rules? Why did she refuse to show evidence? It didn't make sense. Most people who care about rules can show proof. Most people who enforce rules do it with evidence. Karen didn't. That meant she didn't have any. So why was she doing this? Then it hit me. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was creating a situation. She was building a case. She was trying to force me out. But why? I started thinking about the property itself. I thought about the land, the value, the location. It was a ranch. It was a good piece of land. It wasn't cheap. I started thinking about the neighbors. Who owned what? Who had what kind of money? Then I thought about the HOA. What if the HOA wasn't just about rules? What if the HOA was about controlling property? What if the HOA was about forcing people out so someone could buy their land cheap? The thought made my stomach turn. It sounded like a conspiracy theory. It sounded like something from a movie, but it also felt real because Karen's behavior didn't feel normal. It felt like someone who had done this before. I decided to do something risky. I went to the HOA office again. I told myself I was going to be calm. I told myself I wasn't going to show fear. I walked into the office and asked for the HOA records. I asked to see the meeting notes. I asked to see the complaints. The receptionist looked at me like I was crazy. "We don't give that out," she said. I tried again. "Is there a way to request the records?" I asked. She paused. Then she said, "You can submit a formal request." I asked how. She said, "You can fill out a form." I took the form. I filled it out. I wrote that I was requesting records related to my property. I requested meeting notes. I requested complaints. I requested emails. I handed it back. The receptionist looked at it and sighed. "You will have to wait," she said. "Records take time." I left. I felt frustrated, but I also felt something else. Hope, because I was doing something. I was fighting back. Over the next few days, I waited. I watched my mailbox. I watched my phone. I kept thinking about Karen. I kept thinking about her smile, her confident posture, her sharp voice. Then, one morning, I got a call. It was from an unknown number. I answered. A voice spoke quietly. "Stop pushing," the voice said. "You don't know what you're doing." I asked, "Who is this?" The voice paused. Then it said, "You don't want to find out." The call ended. My heart dropped. I felt the fear come back. But it wasn't fear of losing my home anymore. It was fear of what I might discover. Because I realized Karen wasn't just a person. She was part of something bigger. Something that didn't want to be exposed. I knew then that I needed to be careful. I also knew I couldn't stop. I started talking to Lisa again, the neighbor who told me about Karen's history. I told her about the call. Lisa's face changed. She looked scared. She said, "I told you she's dangerous." I asked, "Do you know anything else?" Lisa hesitated. Then she said, "I don't know the details, but I know she's been involved in pushing people out before." I asked, "Why would she do that?" Lisa looked away. Then she said, "Because she benefits." That word hit me hard. Benefits. What did she gain? Money? Power? Control? I didn't know, but I knew I needed to find out. I decided to use a different approach. I started researching. I searched online for Karen's name. I searched for the HOA. I searched for anything that might link her to other communities. It didn't take long. I found something. A news article from a few years ago. It mentioned an HOA board member who had pushed residents out of a community. It mentioned the same tactics. It mentioned the same kind of threats. The name was different, but the description matched. The article didn't mention Karen directly, but it mentioned a board member who had been quietly removed after complaints. I felt a chill. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I knew it was her. I kept digging. I found an old forum post. Someone wrote about an HOA board member who used rules to force residents out. The post mentioned a woman who had a strong influence over the board. I kept going. And then I found something that made my stomach twist. A leaked email. It was from someone on the HOA board. It was discussing a property. It was discussing a resident. It was discussing the possibility of forcing them out. The email said the resident was not a good fit. It said they needed to be removed. I read the email again. The words felt like a knife. I knew this was real. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just strict rules. This was a plan. And I was the target. I didn't know who sent the email. I didn't know who wrote it. But I knew it was connected to the HOA. And I knew one thing. If I didn't expose it, it would continue. If I didn't expose Karen, she would keep doing this. She would keep pushing people out. She would keep controlling the neighborhood. I realized then that this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone. And that gave me a new sense of purpose. I decided to gather more evidence. I decided to record everything. I decided to keep every letter. I decided to keep every email. I decided to protect myself. Because I knew the next step would be the most dangerous. The next step would be when Karen realized I was getting close. And she would do everything to stop me. But I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when I had the truth. Not when I was so close. After I found that leaked email, I felt like I was standing on a cliff. One step forward, and I would fall into a mess I couldn't control. One step back, and I would let Karen win. Either way, I knew the next move mattered. I didn't sleep much that week. Every sound made me jump. Every car passing felt like a threat. Every letter in the mailbox felt like a warning. But I also felt something else, a sense of strength, because I finally understood what was happening. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was controlling people. She was pushing people out. And I wasn't going to be one of them. The next HOA meeting was scheduled. It was a final meeting before they would decide on eviction. I knew I had to be ready. I prepared evidence. I printed the leaked email. I printed my property documents. I printed the HOA rulebook pages that showed my property was compliant. I also prepared a list of questions. Questions that would expose the real reason behind the eviction threat. When the day came, I drove to the meeting early. I parked far away, so I wouldn't be seen too early. I didn't want Karen to feel like she could intimidate me before it started. Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere was tense. People were talking quietly. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Karen was already there. She sat at the front table, her posture perfect. Her eyes scanned the room like she was making sure everyone was on her side. I sat down and took a deep breath. I didn't know how many people would speak for me. I didn't know how many would speak against me. But I knew I had something they didn't. Truth. The meeting began. The president spoke first. He talked about normal things. The budget. The road repairs. The community rules. Then he moved to my case. Karen spoke first. She read from a list of complaints. She spoke with a voice that sounded calm and official. But it wasn't calm. It was controlled. She was controlling the story. She made it sound like I was the problem, like I was the one causing chaos. Then it was my turn. I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. I felt the weight of the room on me. I said, I want to address the allegations. I want to show proof. And I want to know the real reason behind this. Karen's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward like she was ready to attack. But I continued. I have proof that my property is compliant, I said. I have the HOA rulebook pages. I have construction approval documents. I have mortgage papers. Everything is legal. The room was quiet. Karen tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. I held up the printed email. I also have proof that this is not about rules, I said. This is about forcing me out. I read the email aloud. It was hard to read, but I forced myself to keep going. The email said, this resident is not a good fit. We need to remove them. We need to make sure they leave. We can use rules to force them out. I paused. I looked at Karen. Her face changed. Her expression tightened. Her eyes widened. She looked like someone had punched her in the chest. The room was silent. I could feel the tension rising. Then I said the words that changed everything. Karen, I said, did you write this? She stood up quickly. Her voice rose. No, she said. I did not write that. That's not my email. I nodded. I didn't say you wrote it. I said you were part of the group that wrote it. Karen's face turned red. She looked like she was about to scream. She said, you have no proof. I held up my phone. I have proof, I said. I have recorded calls. I have the email. I have the meeting notes. I have proof that the board has been targeting me. Karen looked around the room. Her eyes moved quickly from person to person. She was searching for support. She didn't find it. I could see it in the faces of the other residents. They looked uncomfortable. They looked shocked. They looked like they were realizing something. That's when I knew I had won. Not completely, but enough. Because the truth was out. Karen was losing control. The president stood up. He said, this is serious. We need to review this evidence. Karen's voice shook. This is a smear campaign, she said. You are all being manipulated. I felt a strange calm, because I knew the truth. And truth doesn't need a defense. The president paused. He looked at the board members. Then he said something that surprised me. We will postpone the eviction decision, he said. We will investigate these claims. Karen's face fell. She looked like someone who had just been told she couldn't win. She looked like someone who had just lost control. After the meeting, people approached me. Some apologized. Some said they were sorry. Some said they didn't know what was going on. A few people thanked me. One man said, "You saved us from her." I didn't understand at first, but then I realized Karen had been doing this to others. Not just me. She had been using rules to push people out. She had been controlling the community. She had been taking power. And now, because of me, she was exposed. That night, I went home feeling a mix of emotions. Relief, anger, fear, satisfaction. I knew the fight wasn't over. Karen could still try to push me out. She could still try to use the system. But I also knew something else. She couldn't do it the same way. Because now the truth was out, and people were watching. I started thinking about what I would do next. I decided to keep gathering evidence. I decided to document everything. I decided to prepare for any attack. But I also decided something else. I decided to speak up, not just for myself. For everyone who had been threatened by her, I started talking to neighbors. I told them what I found. I told them what I knew. Some didn't believe me. Some didn't want to get involved. But a few did, and that was enough. Because I realized I wasn't alone. I realized there were other people who had been hurt by her. And now, they were ready to stand up too. The next morning, I received another letter. This one wasn't a threat. It was a warning. It said, "Stop pushing, stop asking questions, or we will take legal action." I read it and smiled, not because I was happy, but because I understood something. They were afraid. They were afraid because I had exposed them. They were afraid because they couldn't control the story anymore. And that's when I realized the most important thing. I wasn't fighting just for my home. I was fighting for justice. And justice was stronger than rules. The day after the meeting, I woke up feeling different. Not just relieved, not just angry, but aware, like something had changed inside me. The truth was out. Karen's plan had been exposed. But that didn't mean the fight was over, because the people behind her still had power, and they still had a lot to lose. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the warning letter again. Stop pushing. Stop asking questions. It was a threat, not a subtle one, not a polite one, a direct one. They were telling me to shut up. They were telling me to accept the eviction. They were telling me to leave. And I realized something. They didn't just want me out of the neighborhood. They wanted me silenced. That's what made them dangerous. Not the rules. Not the HOA. Not even Karen. It was a fact that they could use the system to control people. And if they could control me, they could control anyone. I knew I had to act carefully. I knew I had to protect myself. But I also knew I couldn't back down. I had already come too far. So I did what I should have done from the start. I went to a lawyer. I found a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. I explained everything. The letters, the meeting, the threats, the email. The lawyer listened quietly. When I finished, he didn't look surprised. He said, "This is not uncommon." I asked, "What do you mean?" He explained, "Some HOA boards are corrupt. Some members use rules to force people out. They target new residents. They target people who don't fit their idea of the community. And they do it quietly." He looked at me and said, "You did the right thing by gathering evidence." I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, but also fear, because the lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't just one woman. This was a system built to protect the powerful. He said, "We will file a complaint. We will request a formal investigation. We will request that the HOA board be audited." He paused. Then he said something that made my heart sink. "We need to be careful," he said, "because when you expose a system like this, they will push back." I nodded. I already knew that. But I also knew I had to continue. The lawyer helped me file the complaint. He helped me request the records. He helped me prepare a case. The next step was the investigation. It was slow. It was frustrating. It was like watching a slow-moving storm. But it was happening. And that was what mattered. While the investigation was going on, I continued to talk to neighbors. Not in a loud way. Not in a dramatic way. But in a quiet, steady way. I shared my evidence. I shared my story. I shared what I had learned. Some neighbors still didn't want to get involved. They were scared. They didn't want to risk their own homes. But a few did. A few came forward. They told me they had also received letters. They had also been threatened. They had also been pushed. Some had left quietly because they couldn't handle the pressure. Some had stayed and suffered. Some had never spoken about it. When I heard their stories, my anger grew, not because I wanted revenge, but because I realized how many people Karen had hurt, how many people she had forced out, how many people she had destroyed. The investigation continued. Then one day, I got a call from the lawyer. He said, "We found something." My heart jumped. "What?" I asked. He said, "The HOA board's finances don't add up." He paused. Then he said, "There are payments to a private company, payments that don't match any approved expenses." I felt my stomach drop. "What company?" I asked. He said, "A real estate consulting firm." I stared at the phone. I felt a cold anger, because I knew what that meant. They were not just trying to control the neighborhood. They were trying to profit from it. They were paying people to force residents out. Then they would use the opportunity to influence property sales. It was a scheme, a corrupt scheme, and Karen was a part of it. The lawyer said, "We have proof that the HOA board was coordinating with outside agents to push residents out. We have evidence that Karen was part of the plan." My hands started to shake. I felt like I was finally seeing the full picture. Karen wasn't just a controlling neighbor. She wasn't just a strict board member. She was part of a corruption network, a network that used rules as a weapon. I felt anger, but I also felt something else, satisfaction, because now the truth was undeniable. The next HOA meeting was scheduled again. This time, it wasn't just about my property. This time, it was about the entire board. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air. People were nervous. People were curious. People were watching. Karen was there. She looked different. Not calm. Not confident. She looked scared. I could see it in her eyes. She kept glancing at the door, as if she was expecting someone to arrive. When the meeting began, the president tried to speak normally, but the room was different. The energy had changed. People were no longer blindly trusting the board. People were questioning. Then the lawyer stood up. He spoke clearly. He said, "We have evidence of corruption. We have evidence of payments to outside agents. We have evidence of a plan to force residents out." He looked at Karen. He said, "This board will be suspended pending investigation." The room erupted in whispers. Karen stood up quickly. She shouted, "This is a lie. You're trying to ruin the community." I looked at her. I felt a strange calm, because I knew the truth. I knew the evidence. I knew what she had done. I knew she was exposed. Karen's face turned red. She looked like someone who had been caught. She looked like someone who had lost control. Then she said something that shocked me. She said, "You don't understand. I was doing what needed to be done. This community needed order." I stared at her. I realized something in that moment. She truly believed she was right. She truly believed she was justified. That was the scary part. She wasn't evil. She was convinced. And that's why she was dangerous. The meeting ended with the board being suspended. The investigation continued. The HOA was forced to bring in outside auditors. And I finally felt like I had one. Not just for me, but for everyone who had been threatened, for everyone who had been pushed out, for everyone who had been silenced. After the meeting, a few neighbors came to me. One woman said, "Thank you. I thought I was alone." A man said, "I didn't know what to do, but now I see I had a voice." I felt emotional, not because I was proud, but because I finally understood something. I had not only protected my home, I had protected the community. I had exposed the system, and I had shown people that they didn't have to be afraid. A few weeks later, the HOA sent a final letter. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was an apology. It said the eviction threat was withdrawn. It said the board was under investigation. It said the HOA would be restructured. I read the letter and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I felt like I could finally breathe. But I also felt something else, a sense of sadness, because I realized how many people had been hurt, how many lives had been affected, and I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about a system that needed a change. The next day, I went outside and looked at my ranch. The fence, the driveway, the yard, everything looked the same, but I felt different because I knew what I had done. I had stood up, I had fought back, I had revealed the biggest secret, and I had won, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been threatened by someone who used power to control others. And that was the real victory.